Good afternoon, everybody. This is David Skok, the CEO and editor-in-chief of The Logic. We're going to just wait a few seconds here, maybe a minute, for everybody to get online, and then we will begin. Thank you for joining. All right. So thank you again for joining us. I'm David Skok, the CEO and editor-in-chief of The Logic. This is the final public webinar conference call that we've been hosting a bunch of these over the last month as part of our birthday celebrations for our second year anniversary. For those of you who are joining us who are not subscribers to The Logic, I just want to give you a little plug of who we are and what we do. The Logic is a news publication focused on Canada's innovation economy, or more broadly, our transformation from a resource economy to a knowledge-based economy. We have exclusive stories in journalism, like a great story that we did publish yesterday on Mountain Equipment Co-op by Catherine McIntyre. It's that kind of reporting that we do. And we also host these types of conference calls with people who are incredibly smart and intelligent and hope to have conversations with our community about what we do and about what we want Canada to be. With that, I'm delighted, I'm so excited for this, to welcome Zita Cobb to join me today. She is the founder and CEO of Shorefast and the innkeeper at the Fogo Island Inn, and I suspect she doesn't need that introduction or a long one because you've all probably heard of Zita. But if you haven't, I wanted to first just tell you a little bit about Zita, who is from Fogo Island. And really, this conversation is going to be about how you build community and resilience in the wake of COVID-19. And she's a much better speaker than I am, so I'll let Zita talk about that. But first, I want to welcome Zita and ask her, or ask you, Zita. Yesterday, there was an announcement of the Atlantic provinces reopening, and I'm curious, from your perspective, how you're digesting that news, what information it is, and what it means for Fogo Island.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me on. Well, yesterday was definitely a red letter day for us on Fogo Island, because we've been in this as a province in quite a tight lockdown. And of course, we have two very important legs on our economy on Fogo Island. One is the fishery. And the fishery actually struggled to get started with all of the COVID precautions in the fish plants, but did get off to a start. And it's looking like it will be a pretty reasonable year for the fishery. And so then comes our visitor economy, which is anchored, of course, by the inn. And most of our guests come from outside of Atlantic Canada. And so while we were super happy to learn about the bubble starting on the 3rd of July, it didn't mean we could open our inn then, because 60% of our guests come from outside of Atlantic Canada. 60% come from Canada, a small, tiny percentage from Atlantic Canada, and 40% come from the US and further afield. And so the key for us is this signaling, and we all understand that this is, an aspirational date, that Newfoundland, our premier, indicated yesterday that we could open to Canada, possibly, if all goes well, on the 17th of July. So that is just super news. We are at the end. We've been organizing to be ready for working and living and practicing hospitality in a COVID world. But we'll certainly be ready on the 17th of July.
Terrific. And I have many questions about how that practically works for you. But I want to step back, and every great entrepreneur, every great visionary has an origin story. And I'm hoping you can share with us the origin story of how Shorefast came about, how Fogo Island Inn came about, and your own life story, Zita.
Well, it's a little bit like the Heidi story, I'm afraid to say, which is maybe told too often, but I'm an 8th generation Fogo Islander, you sort of said at the beginning, and I left the island after high school to study business in Ontario. And my career was largely in technology, and I finished my career with a company called JDS Uniphase, which some people, which still exists. It just has now been, I feel like I spent my career building this quite a big company with a lot of acquisitions, and now they've put it asunder and made a whole smaller companies. It's strange.
And JDS Uniphase was one of the big Ottawa tech companies, right? In
Absolutely,
the day, and Nortel and other things.
The founders came out of Nortel and BNR, and we merged with a California company called Uniphase in 1999, and I stayed on for 2 years after that. But to come back to, as you call it, the origin story, I am a product of Fogo Island, and I'm going to be turning 61 next month. And no, it's a lie. I'm turning 62 next month. But I've really lived in 3 centuries, because until I was 10, I really lived in the 19th century. Because growing up in Fogo Island, I was born in 58. We didn't have running water. We didn't have electricity. My parents couldn't read and write. And we lived perfectly happy, intact lives. Now, I don't want to overstate happiness when people had a toothache or health problems and all of that, because there were no dentists and doctors were scarce. But we understood what a community was. We understood what human dignity was, and we understood what agency was. When I was 10, really the worst of the 20th century came down on top of us in the form of the industrialization of the fishery. And I saw everything that we valued, and my parents valued, be called into question and peril overnight. And it really looked like for quite a long time that we would be resettled as an island, as much of Outport, Newfoundland was forcibly resettled in the 60s. But we avoided resettlement because of kind of a miracle that arrived in the form of the National Film Board of Canada, who came with a really powerful art project that engaged people in the community and really effectively helped people see what they had. I mean, you could look at Fogo Island anytime and say, well, God, there's nothing there. You know, the fish are gone, and it's a rocky place, and how could anybody make a living, and the people don't read and write, and how do we build on that? Whereas through that, what's now called a Fogo process, we started to understand what we had, because nobody built a future, builds a future now even, based on what they don't know and don't have. So it helped us.
Zita, if I can stop you, I just want to point out, so there were, I think, and I read this, that there were 5,000 residents spread across 10 different communities. And as part of that National Film Board project, 3,000 of the 5,000 members of the community viewed these films, which is remarkable to me.
It is. Colin Lowe, who is really a national treasure, who was the filmmaker, Montreal-based, he grew up in Alberta, he really gave people voice and drew people into the process. He made sure that Fogo Islanders saw the films first. And really, it was through these films that we got to know our neighbors in the other communities. Because it's a big island. It's 4 times the size of Manhattan. And if I grew up in Chauvet's Arm, I certainly didn't know anybody from Island Harbor, which is the other side of the island. But we got to know each other through these films, and people came together. And the really pivotal thing, and never underestimate the power of art, is that this really helped us start this cooperative, which is called the Fogo Island Fisheries Co-op, which owns the fish plants and owns the fishery on Fogo Island to this day. And that's how we held on. So that was the 20th century. And then my career to finish on the 3 centuries was in the 21st century, because I worked in something that called wave division multiplexing, which are the little optical bits that enabled the digital age. So all of that in 62 years.
And so then you decided to, you sold out and exited the company, and then decided to return home. What made you decide to come home?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, I'm a Newfoundlander, and we don't want for love of place, you know. And there's a joke that I don't tell many Newfoundland jokes, but I tell this one, which is, how can you tell the Newfoundlander in heaven? She's the one moaning and groaning because she wants to go home. And so, you know, that's in me. Also, in my career, you know, I think I bought 40 companies in 2 years on all the different continents. And I was really, and this was kind of an opportunity to see some of the worst impacts of this ill-considered globalization that we're all trying to recover from. And I started to realize that communities everywhere are under pressure, because on a good day, that form of globalization is agnostic to communities, and on a bad day, it's downright hostile. I had started on the island some scholarships for the kids coming out of the high school. And this is a kind of a much told story, but I was at home doing a review of the scholarship, and one woman stood up and said, "It's all very well and fine," she said this, "but you're just paying our kids to leave. Can't you do something to make work here so that they will come back?" And of course, once your mind turns to that, you can't turn back. You can't look away. So with my brothers, we started to think about what might we do. And so in 2005, 2006, we got super busy. We started with setting up, we're kind of a hybrid organization. We set up Shorefast, which is a registered charity of Canada. The goal was to put another leg on the economy, but to do it in a way that strengthens the continuity and strengthens the things that really matter, which are nature and culture. And we wanted to create, to complement the fishery, which is owned in a cooperative, we want to create a community-owned set of assets. And so the charity now owns 3 businesses, doesn't operate them because we have to have that separation of church and state, so to speak. So the inn is owned by the charity called Shorefast. We have a wood shop, a furniture shop, and something called Fogo Island Fish, which is a small fish distribution business that brings fish to lovely restaurants in Toronto, which we hope will open soon.
Yes, and some, I think we've all seen the Shorefast logo on some menus in Toronto. Is this where we can talk about the bubble diagram or the Bubblegram?
Yes, actually, this is the time.
What is the Bubblegram?
The Bubblegram. So I think this is to go back to 2006, which is, of course, many, many eras ago now. And we were sort of map making and orienting in what is now here in this place that we call home, and what might we add to make it stronger. So in a series of conversations that, started probably in 2005 and will go on forever, with Fogo Islanders, figuring out what do we use what's called asset-based community development. John McKnight is the pioneer of this, but basically it's a way of seeing, and you ask and answer questions. What do we have? What do we know? What do we love? What do we miss? And most importantly, what can we do about it? And so that Bubblegram came out of that. And what we came to see is we wanted to build something based on the inherent strength of Fogo Island and Fogo Islanders, which is a profound hospitality. And we didn't have a great inn. We wanted to make a world-class inn where we could practice hospitality. And we can talk about hospitality because it's such a powerful vessel for culture. So that was at the center of that Bubblegram was the inn. And right next to it, interlinked with it, is something called Fogo Island Arts. Art is about knowledge. Art is about ideas. And we understood that if we're going to create a set of businesses, it's really, really good to build the critics right into it, build the resistance in. So it just keeps us mindful of the most important things. And then we mapped out in that Bubblegram the existing things that were there on the island. I mean, obviously the fishery and all the cultural assets we have and all the physical assets we have and all the social assets we have. And then tried to figure out how do we kind of operate the things we're going to do like it's an electric eel in a pond that energizes the things that are already there.
So this is a really interesting approach, because if you think about kind of the way of the world right now, and this is a sweeping generalization, so I hope you'll indulge me, but you have maybe a company or a real estate company will buy up land, and then they will imagine what they will build. And so you start to see, certain types of box stores or factory things that all look the same and are planted in different cities. This approach is one of bottom up, but we're just going to have our vision be implanted on yours. Whereas what I find so fascinating about what you did is you created an ecosystem around what was already there. And I know there's a Harvard Business School case study that you're now a part of, and I think the title is kind of relevant to talk about here, where it's called, the case study is called A Strange and Familiar Way to Reimagine Capitalism. Is this part of that? And what does capitalism look like to you?
It is very much part of that. And that way of development that you described, and certainly not all development is progress, really causes a flattening of place. And so to me, reimagining capitalism starts with, as my old boss used to say at JDS Uniphase, Joseph Strauss, he would come in every morning, he'd say, the most important thing is to keep the most important thing the most important thing. So the most important thing, as far as we are concerned, is nature and culture. And we tend to see, maybe this is a funny way to say it, but in a way, money as a kind of creative resource. And so how can we use money and how can we use business to strengthen nature and culture? And if you start with that kind of a place, and we also start from a place, as my dad used to say, nature knows everything. And sometimes we humans pay enough attention to figure things out. I mean, nature understands this virus. We don't yet. And so the question we approached was, what is here? What has inherent value to our human ability to make meaning? Let's just start with that. And then how can we use money as a creative resource? How can we use design? Beauty is important. How can we use all of these human tools to give them space and place to exist and be felt by Fogo Islanders and by visitors? And so in the architecture, we worked with a Newfoundland-born, Montreal-educated architect named Todd Saunders, who has practice in Norway. And I mean, we never had a contract with Todd. We didn't need one because the design brief was so simple. It was this: you have to figure out how to express in contemporary architecture what we have learned in 400 years of clinging to this rock. Of course, that gives rise to something that's specific and beautiful and carries place.
It's so wonderful to hear you talk about sense of place, and I want to bring, like, these conversations can become very easily abstract ideas and very esoteric. But I think what I admire so much about what you've done is it's real. It's underneath your fingernails. And when I think about what's happening in the world today, we have a global pandemic that has kept people in their homes, away from their community in some ways, and yet the community has still arisen there. We have an economic crisis that is going to only exacerbate existing inequality and disenfranchise the disenfranchised even more. And we have a racism uprising and a recognition that the social system is rigged in some ways against some members of a community. And so I'm wondering, with all of those three tectonic forces happening at the same time, as someone who is living community, how do you view all of this, and how do we move forward?
Well, I think we need to think deeply about the basic building blocks of our society, which I think are human communities. And communities are not just something we have. They're also something we do. And healthy communities, by definition, are complex, adaptive coalitions that hold a broad set of people together in some kind of a tangle so they can muck along together. And when you really think about it, communities are the only places that hold values and morals and ethics. And I think most of us know that the quality of our lives fundamentally is the quality of our relationships. And the quality of our relationships is the quality of our awareness. And all of those ways of thinking about how we exist and how we make meaning and how we live with each other and how we live with each other better, I think all come together in a thing called a community. I think the problem we have is, if I'm going to start talking about community now, and it's a little bit like talking about love. People either never felt it, don't know what it is, or think they know what it is, but maybe haven't quite understood it deeply enough. And to me, a community exists in a physical, geographical place, and it is a place that people feel they have a shared fate, F-A-T-E, and they act like they have a shared fate. And communities are strengthened by the many, many, many networks that we all belong to. I personally don't think there's any such thing as an online community. I think they're online networks, and we all belong to them, and they are super important for exchange of ideas and commerce. And they can absolutely help us strengthen our communities. But as we find out every time, there's an awful storm in Newfoundland, which happens, the people who are going to come dig you out when you're snowed in are the people next door or down the road. I personally think a community is defined by this distance a human being can walk before dark.
you worked for a multinational company, and when I hear you talk about that sense of place and community, for a long time, up until the pandemic, I think you have a lot of people who felt like they were part of a global community. I think of a consultant who spends 5 days a week somewhere else, or a hedge fund manager who's at a conference with peers from Japan or Saudi Arabia in LA 4 times a month. Those aren't communities under your definition.
Absolutely.
And I wonder, and I wonder, if I said to you at the beginning of this, I wanted this to be an optimistic conversation in the midst of everything else. How do you then, if we are talking about a sense of place, my worry about all of that is a sense of economic nationalism or populism that can arise out of a rejection of the globalism. So how do you have both, or can you have both?
Absolutely, you can have both. I mean, now that I've told a Newfoundland joke, I could tell a Canadian joke. Why did the Canadian cross the road? To get to the middle. I don't think we need to look at these as extremes. We have to find the ands. The ors are very easy to find and they're not productive. But finding the and is a very productive place. And I think to dedicate ourselves, and I think this is happening kind of naturally in the world and needs to happen, to localize the global economy is not to reject the global at all. I just think we have to find ways to improve the connective tissue that holds us together as a set of communities that make up a province called Newfoundland and Labrador, as a set of communities that make up a country called Canada, as a set of countries that make up the world. I don't think, people who, this idea of the global community or I'm a global citizen, that to me has too often been used by people who don't want to feel responsibility for consequences. If I do something on Fogo Island that Fogo Islanders don't like, I would expect to see them come out to my house and I would hear about it. I'd hear about it at the grocery store. And that makes me better. And I think this separation of ownership of assets and businesses from place is not only dangerous, but I think it's a missed opportunity. I think for businesses too, the quality of a business is the quality of its relationships. And and as we move into a world of more stakeholder capitalism, the most important relationships I think that businesses have are with the communities they serve. And that should be seen as a wonderful opportunity to get stronger and better as businesses.
Yeah, so the accountability that you get from a sense of place or a sense of community is a feature, not a bug. And I think, even just looking at it from a journalistic lens and what I do for a living, news publications are going through their own sense of internal strife. And part of that is because we haven't listened to our communities and reflected the desires of the community back to them. You would say that's, and part of that has always been this sense of, well, we may know better, quite frankly, that we are here to tell you how the world is, and that means exposing you to things that you may not like. But in some ways, I wonder if we as media organizations have, in doing that, thrown the baby out with the bathwater and not listened to our communities and what they want.
Well, David, I think if you're guilty of that, and you know more about it than I do, then you got a lot of guilty people alongside you in a lot of different industries. Because I think what we all do is, I think we can't be bothered with the specificity. The specificity is overwhelming, and I can look at 10 different communities on Fogo Island who, if you zoom out, they all kind of look the same. You zoom in, you find just depth of differences that are beautiful and specific. And the joy and the answers and beauty is actually in the specific. And I think when we're trying to run a business, or whether it's a newspaper or whatever else, we can't work in chaos. I'm not even sure we can work all that comfortable in complexity. So we tend to want to simplify things. And when we do, we lose the specific. And before you know it, you got a box store that nobody really feels any joy from.
I'd love to, and I should add, if anybody has questions, I see there's a question from Greg that we will get to, but if any others have questions, please write them into the chat and we will ask Zita over the coming minutes. Talking about specifics, I would love it. You shared an anecdote with me the other day about just how the island works and the intercooperation of these different decisions that are made, incremental decisions about even how the ferry runs. Can you share that with the listeners and give it as an example of just how tight-knit everything has to be?
Absolutely. So I go around saying we need to reshape, and it's not that big a job, our economy. Let's just start with Canada. Reshape the economy so that we put communities back in the economy. I will go further and say that communities should be at the center of the economy. And I think if you haven't read a book by a fellow named Rajan called The Third Pillar, I'd highly recommend it. And he talks about our society being built on three pillars: government, business, and community. And just to put a little bit more of a definition on community, a community includes all of the people and all of the organizations that exist within it, whether they're businesses or not-for-profits, whether they're the municipality, the municipal government, they're all part of the community. But we haven't done enough work to strengthen the ability of a community to be an economic actor. So, and yet we design systems that cut through communities. So let's just talk about the transportation system or the health system or the food system. All those systems cut through communities. In small communities like Fogo Island, you can see the impact. So one example that I was giving you is, which tells you that system is not optimized for the well-being of the community, is our health system. So if there's a little hospital on Fogo Island, and if somebody gets sick, the doctor can and must call the ferry, and the ferry gets commandeered, whether it's the middle of the night or whatever, take someone to the mainland so they can get to Gander, to a bigger hospital. It is not a part of that doctor's job, and it's too much to ask, but it hasn't been considered in the design of the system to think about, my God, we could have 3 tractor trailer loads of fish lined up to leave the island, but fish can't get off the island now because the ferry's gone on a medical emergency, and now the crew have to rest. They can't keep going 24 hours. We could have a dozen cars of people who have flights to catch out of Gander that all can't make flights. We could have a whole ton of people from Fogo Island who are going for medical appointments or perhaps cancer treatments on the mainland. All of that is thrown into a total upheaval because of a decision that is made in a system that's been designed in a way that decisions are made in isolation. And so the point of all of that is to say, we need to think about communities as a whole, and we need to think about the systems that cut through them in a holistic way, because we're busy creating a whole other set of problems by trying to solve one problem. So I think we humans are capable of thinking in a more holistic way. And I think if there's one thing I want to make sure comes across in this, David, is communities, healthy communities, wholeness. And we humans, whether we're business people or mayors or citizens, we need to see the whole.
How do you structurally do that, Zita? The Canadian federal government is a massive, massive operation, and there are silos naturally in any big, large corporation or agency. There are silos, and so when you talk about that the unintended consequences as things roll out, how do you tactically make sure that everybody understands what the impact of their decisions are?
So now you're to the part of our work that it is going to become more at the forefront over the next years, our Shorefast work, because what we do is deeply specific, but universally applicable in many ways. I believe we basically do not have the architectures to do what you just said. And I think they're not hard to grow, but we need to create these platforms where we can have conversations about how should this work. And in those conversations, communities, in our case, Fogo Island, needs to be present in that conversation, whether it's about the ferry, whether it's about daycare. I could give you 20 more examples. So I think the opportunity in front of us now is to really think about how we create these platforms or these architectures for that kind of collaborative engagement that figures out how is something going to land before it's deployed. Because it doesn't matter if we're talking about climate change, new economy, unless it lands and lands well in the places we live, then it doesn't exist. It's not going to work.
Did you feel when you built the inn, were you at that point, were you thinking about these things, or was it stuff that kind of rolled out? You know, there's somebody who wrote here who actually, Roland Wells, who lives on Fogo Island, who talks about the unintended consequences of success. But more specifically, were you aware that you were going to have to at some point address some of the larger issues around the overall economy of Fogo Island, and not just what was beneficial to the inn?
Well, I mean, keep in mind that the inn belongs to Fogo Islanders. So we set out to do something. I mean, we could talk about visitor economy and tourism for a very long time. And I think there's a huge opportunity in Canada to really pay close attention to how to develop a tourism economy in a way that brings the smallest amount of negative impact and the highest amount of benefit to citizens. Because certainly coming out of this pandemic, the whole tourism industry is looking at the amount of mass tourism that exists in the world and how it's actually crushed communities. And we need to understand that for tourism to be a productive industry, it can't be your only one. And so on Fogo Island, we have the fishery, and that is super important. I think if it's your only industry, it's already a dance with the devil. And then the other thing is that you have to get the right scale. And so on Fogo Island these days, we're about 2,500 people. We didn't build an inn that has 400 rooms or even 100. We built 29 rooms because we felt that was about the right number of people that we could welcome that would create a positive experience for both hosts and guests. And I think there's such an opportunity to think about Canada, which has many, many, many culturally rich rural places. Some are quite remote, whose economies can benefit from thoughtful tourism. And I think we're just at the beginning of understanding the economic value of culture. I mean, you talked at the beginning, David, about being focused on a knowledge-based economy. Culture is knowledge. And how we interact with it. I mean, there are many, many tourism projects in the world where the project itself is a squatter on the land it exists on. We tried in some ways to instrumentalize ourselves because we created an asset that belongs to the community. I mean, I can die tomorrow, and that hopefully will carry on for generations and generations of Fogo Islanders.
As I mentioned, we reported on the story of Mountain Equipment Co-op, now called MEC, which is a cooperative, and they're in a bit of, it seems like based on the reporting that they're in a bit of trouble. There's a question from Tamara Payton here asking how might asset-based community development and the questions posed as part of that process help save organizations like Mountain Co-op or any B Corp really. The interplay between social, I'm not sure, Tamara, if I'm butchering your question here, but social entrepreneurship and social good.
Well, I think maybe I'm a little extreme in this, but I think all business should be social business. In other words, if you don't exist to solve a problem as a business, why do you exist at all? So I think whether it's, and I'm a MEC, let's talk about MEC. I think they might be, I'm not an insider in any way, I'm just a customer like many of us. Yeah, I think maybe the most important thing stopped being the most important thing somewhere along the path. And I think they operate in very tricky retail terrain, and I don't envy them that at all. But I think it's just understanding why you exist, what are your values? And if the reason you exist isn't existed and began and you don't have a new purpose, then maybe it's time to pack it up anyway.
I want to bring it back a little bit to the pandemic, and I guess how are you adapting? How's the island adapting, and the inn, and what have been the challenges you faced, and how have you navigated through this crisis?
Yeah, we started off with we got a lot of experience in the first week after the pandemic, because at the time it was declared and when the lockdown came in Newfoundland, we had guests at the inn. And these were American guests And obviously, we weren't going to throw them out on the street. So we right away had to put into place all of the things we knew then, which was a lot less than we now know, around distancing. And anytime they didn't go, when they were going on outings, we would call ahead to any the craft shops they were planning to visit and see if those people were open to welcoming visitors and keeping that distance. And so we got a little practice in that first week. It has been a cataclysmic impact on our business and our people. 90% of our people are on layoff, which I know is the case across the country and around the world. So the economic pain of it is dreadful. The being frightened for our very mortal lives that exists in our community as well as anywhere else. And I think we've all got a very, very healthy respect for this virus and understanding that it's not going away anytime soon. So it's up to us to go forth in a way that keeps vigilance and understands that we have to live with it. I would say that we're excited at the possibility of being able to get back open, cautiously.
Yeah, and I'll give you a free plug here. Anything you'd want to tell anybody listening in about why they should come visit and what kind of precautions you'll be taking?
Yeah, we, of course, it's very helpful that our head of guest services is a nurse who ran a hospital for many years. So when she first came to join the inn, she said, "I don't understand why you even want to hire me, because I just know about hospitals." And we jokingly said to her at the time, "Well, it's kind of, the hospitality is the same. It's just that people keep their clothes on most of the time." Anyway, so that has been very helpful. One of the things we're doing is, obviously we won't be able to go to full occupancy. And so we're targeting around 50%. So that gives us lots and lots of space. We're reconfiguring, of course, the way we serve food and keeping the distance in the dining room, which gives us an opportunity actually to use some more of the spaces, because we have spaces on the roof that we haven't used for dining, and the library and other places. So I think that's exciting. Some of the things we won't be able to do, like we have a shed that we've used, kind of a shed that we use for kind of crab boil ups and things that puts people in very close proximity. We'll move that outside. And basically before people come, we will go through a process with them so we understand any health issues they have. And so our ability to be able to, and we don't have so many guests. That our business model is a high price with a small number of people. And so in this case, that actually makes it a much more manageable. No one's going to walk through the doors of the inn that we're not expecting. And one of the things, unfortunately, we've had to discontinue in light of the pandemic is we can't open our dining room to diners that are not staying at the inn, because we just think it's more risk than probably anybody wants to take on. So we're going to keep the inn for people that are in-house guests this year.
Zita, we'd only have a few minutes left, and I'm hoping I can just, on a personal note, there's a question here as well that this will jump off of, from Diane McDonald, about resiliency. You when you were 5.5 years old, you were diagnosed with TB, sent away for a year. And I'm curious, this is about resilience and about digging it through and fighting through and coming out to the other side. In your life, how have you approached challenges personally, and what advice or words of wisdom would you give for others right now who are probably going through a lot of things that they've never experienced before?
Yeah, I think resilience is well, it's about attitude, but it's about knowledge. And I think communities that possess a deep understanding of their assets, whether it's a Fogo Islander who knows how to get in a boat, even to make a boat and go out on the ocean and the North Atlantic Ocean, not just any ocean, and catch a fish to sustain him or herself, that's resilience. And I think the more knowledge we have of nature, first of all, that's very calming and orienting, because that's kind of makes you feel eternity in a way. I think when we think about forms of human capital, social capital is so important. And the fact that in a community, people have each other and learn from each other, can rely on each other, that is super important to resilience. That, I see so much that can go on in cities where, somebody might lose their job and another terrible thing happens, and, then they're homeless before they know it. I think the stronger we build our communities, people won't fall out of their own story, at least not fall so far, that because we can catch each other. But I think it's also about having a relationship with time. If there's anything that I take from growing up on Fogo Island, is always the sense of continuity. Many people came before me there on that island, and many more are going to come after me. And this idea that we're just here for a little time, and in the time we're here, let's create as much strength and resilience and knowledge, share that knowledge that helps the people that come after. And I think we kind of organize our projects around a poem, which is called The Art of Walking Upright. The art of walking upright is the art of using both feet. One is for holding on, and one is for reaching out. And I think that motion of, yes, we belong to the world. Yes, we want to participate in the bigger world. Yes, we can learn from the bigger world. And we hold on to this place. So I think that kind of way of belonging is deeply resilient.
It's such a wonderful way to end this. I know that you wouldn't consider the Logic a community by the definition of physical standards, but I'm so delighted and honored that you took the time to join our community for an afternoon. And I hope that others got as much as I did out of this conversation about how we can move forward, one putting one flag in front of the other, as the poem says. To all of you who joined, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Zita, for your time today. And I just wanted to put one more plug out there for the Logic. For those of you who have enjoyed our series of talks over the last month in our birthday celebrations, we had hoped to do it in person at a summit that would have been this week. That was all obviously derailed early on this year. But I hope that we hope that you've had a great time. I also want to particularly give a huge amount of thanks to Amanda Roth and Jenna Meisner and Caroline Mercer at the Logic, who have helped put on these events. It looks easy. It's not easy. It takes a lot of work, and I get to be the person on the fun end of the microphone here, but there's a lot of people behind the scenes. And so thank you all for listening. I hope you will continue reading, and thank you, Zita, again, for your time today.
Thanks,
Goodbye,
David.
everybody.